Today is day 3 for the Come Follow Me study for this week, June 15th through the 21st. The battle is the Lord's. 1 Samuel 17 through 18, 24 through 26, and 2 Samuel 5 through 7. Wednesday, June 17th, 2026, 1 Samuel 18. As you read 1 Samuel 18, consider contrasting Saul and his son Jonathan, who, if not for David, could have assumed he would be the next king. Jonathan loves David. 1 Samuel 18:1. And it came to pass, when he had made an end of speaking unto Saul, that the soul of Jonathan was knit with the soul of David, and Jonathan loved him as his own soul. Elder Jeffrey R. Holland said, "No definition of friendship could better describe the relationship of David and Jonathan in the Old Testament. Jonathan, the son of King Saul, was a valiant soldier in his own right and a worthy young prince in Israel. But when David came onto the scene fresh from his mighty victory over Goliath, having already been anointed by the prophet Samuel, it was he, not Jonathan, who would be successor to the increasingly disobedient Saul." 1 Samuel 18:2-4. And Saul took him that day, and would let him go no more home to his father's house. Then Jonathan and David made a covenant, because he loved him as his own soul. And Jonathan stripped himself of the robe that was upon him, and gave it to David, and his garments, even his sword, and to his bow, and to his girdle. By giving his clothes and weapons to David, Jonathan showed his friendship and his support of David becoming the next king. President Jeffrey R. Holland taught, "To a lesser man, or a lesser friend, than Jonathan, David would have been a terrible threat, a natural rival. But he wasn't. We don't know that Jonathan expected to succeed his father as king, but he certainly could have foreseen that possibility. What we do know is that the soul of Jonathan was knit with the soul of David, and Jonathan loved him as his own soul. So great was their devotion to one another that they made a covenant of loyalty. As a symbolic token of his devotion to the newly anointed king, Jonathan stripped himself of the princely robe he wore, and gave it to David and his garments, even to his sword, and to his bow, and to his girdle." John W. Welch said, "In the Hebrew Bible, the covenant usually describes the entire relationship between God and the children of Israel. Terms such as contract, agreement, treaty, obligation, brotherhood, law, and cutting or binding express facets of the covenant. But none of these alone is sufficient to capture the full meaning of this distinctive, self-contained Israelite religious concept. It has been said that according to the Israelite concept of covenant, one enters into a fellowship of the strongest order with another party, virtually becoming like that person himself, as in the covenant between Jonathan and David in 1 Samuel 18:1 and 3-4. Saul sets David over his armies, 1 Samuel 18:5. And David went out whithersoever Saul sent him, and behaved himself wisely. And Saul set him over the men of war, and he was accepted in the sight of all the people, and also in the sight of Saul's servants. David is honored by the people, and Saul becomes jealous. 1 Samuel 18:6-10. And it came to pass, as they came, when David was returned from the slaughter of the Philistine, that the women came out of all cities of Israel, singing and dancing, to meet King Saul with tabrets, with joy, and with instruments of music. And the women answered one another as they played, and said, Saul has slain his thousands, and David his 10,000s. And Saul was very wroth, and the saying displeased him, and he said, They have ascribed unto David 10,000s, and to me they have ascribed but thousands. And what can he have more but the kingdom? And Saul eyed David from that day and forward. And it came to pass on the morrow that the evil spirit which was not of God came upon Saul, and he prophesied in the midst of the house. And David played with his hand as at other times, and there was a javelin in Saul's hand. Once again, weaknesses in Saul's character began to manifest themselves. He was jealous of David's newly won popularity. Verse 10 in the Joseph Smith translation again makes it clear that the evil spirit Saul possessed was not from God. Saul tried 2 ways to do away with David. But although Saul was jealous of David's growing popularity with the people, there was no indication yet that he knew that David had been anointed to be his successor. 1 Samuel 18:11. And Saul cast the javelin, for he said, I will smite David, even to the wall with it. And David avoided out of his presence twice. President Ezra Taft Benson taught, Saul became an enemy to David through pride. He was jealous because the crowd of Israelite women were singing that David had slain his thousands and David his 10,000s. Saul's pride led him to despise David and even attempt to kill him. President Ezra Taft Benson continued, the proud stand more in fear of men's judgment than of God's judgment. What will men think of me weighs heavier than what will God think of me. King Noah was about to free the prophet Abinadi, but an appeal to his pride by his wicked priests sent Abinadi to the flames. Herod sorrowed at the request of his wife to behead John the Baptist, but his prideful desire to look good to them which sat with him at meat caused him to kill John. Fear of men's judgment manifests itself in competition for men's approval. The proud love the praise of men more than the praise of God. Our motives for the things we do are where the sin is manifest. Jesus said, He did always those things that pleased God. Would we do well to have the pleasing of God as our motive, rather than to try to elevate ourselves above our brother, or outdo another? When pride has a hold on our hearts, we lose our independence of the world and deliver our freedoms to the bondage of men's judgment. The world shouts louder than the whisperings of the Holy Ghost. The reasoning of men overrides the revelations of God, and the proud let go of the iron rod. 1 Samuel 18:12. And Saul was afraid of David, because the Lord was with him, and was departed from Saul. Brian Richards said, Fear and jealousy are attributes of the wicked. They do not reside in the saints of God. For perfect love casteth out all fear. David doesn't even seem afraid of Saul. He never resents him. He never seeks retaliation. He honors him as the Lord's anointed king. 1 Samuel 18:13-17. Therefore Saul removed him from him and made him his captain over 1,000. And he went out and came in before the people. And David behaved himself wisely in all his ways, and the Lord was with him. Wherefore, when Saul saw that he behaved himself very wisely, he was afraid of him. But all Israel and Judah loved David, because he went out and came in before them. And Saul said to David, Behold, my elder daughter Merab, her will I give thee to wife. Only be thou valiant for me, and fight the Lord's battles. For Saul said, Let not mine hand be upon him, but let the hand of the Philistines be upon him. Brian Richards says, in a foreshadowing of David's moment of greatest weakness, Saul tries to kill David by sending him against the Philistines. 1 Samuel 18:18-28. And David said unto Saul, Who am I, and what is my life, or my father's family in Israel, that I should be son-in-law to the king? But it came to pass at the time when Merab, Saul's daughter, should have been given to David, that she was given unto Adriel the Maholathite to wife. And Michal, Saul's daughter, loved David. And they told Saul, and the thing pleased him. And Saul said, I will give him her, that she may be a snare to him, and that the hand of the Philistines may be against him. Wherefore Saul said to David, Thou shalt this day be my son-in-law in the one of the twain, or by one of my 2 daughters. And Saul commanded his servants, saying, Commune with David secretly, and say, Behold, the king hath delight in thee, and all his servants love thee. Now therefore be the king's son-in-law. And Saul's servants spake those words in the ears of David. And David said, Seemeth it to you a light thing, or insignificant, to be a king's son-in-law, seeing that I am a poor man and lightly esteemed? And the servants of Saul told him, saying, On this manner spake David. And Saul said, Thus shall ye say to David, The king desireth not any dowry, but 100 foreskins of the Philistines, to be avenged of the king's enemies. But Saul thought to make David fall by the hand of the Philistines. And when his servants told David these words, it pleased David well to be the king's son-in-law, and the days were not expired. Wherefore David arose and went, he and his men, and slew of the Philistines 200 men. And David brought their foreskins, and they gave them in full tale, or full number, to the king, that he might be the king's son-in-law. And Saul gave him Michal his daughter to wife. David marries Michal, a daughter of Saul. 1 Samuel 18:28-29. And Saul saw and knew that the Lord was with David, and that Michal, Saul's daughter, loved him. And Saul was yet the more afraid of David, and Saul became David's enemy continually. Keith Meservey said, over the years, these seeds of envy ripened into full bloom as jealousy began to eat away at Saul's rational powers and move him to seek David's death. On one occasion, Saul sent David on a seemingly impossible mission against the Philistines, hoping that the enemy would accomplish what he himself had been unable to do. But the mission was successful, bringing more honor to the young man who little needed it, and a lessening of honor to the king. Saul subordinated everything else to his all-consuming desire to kill David. When his son Jonathan identified himself with David, an angry Saul almost killed him. 85 priesthood leaders mistakenly accused of aiding David were butchered in a pitiless massacre. Whenever David's whereabouts was ascertained, Saul led a personal campaign against him. David had succeeded in staying alive despite Saul's best efforts to the contrary. Never did he make any effort to avenge the accumulating wrongs committed against him by Saul. The king's actions were left entirely to the Lord to judge and to reward in his own due time. On at least 2 occasions, in the cave and on the field, David could have killed Saul. Each time the young man's followers urged him to kill the king, believing that Saul had been delivered into David's hands. But David knew that all men are in the hands of God, and he refused to draw his sword against the Lord's anointed. The impeccable faith of the boy who went forth to meet Goliath was still burning deep in the young man, who knew that his time would come to be king. Although David undoubtedly had a strong desire to defend himself and take revenge on Saul, he was able to reconcile these desires with his absolute respect of authority in the form of the king and with his love for the Lord. 1 Samuel 18:30. Then the princes of the Philistines went forth, and it came to pass after they went forth that David behaved himself more wisely than all the servants of Saul, so that his name was much set by or adored. How did Saul and Jonathan react to David's success? What can you learn from this experience? What do you find in Jonathan's attitudes and actions that reminds you of Jesus Christ? 1 Samuel 19. Saul seeks to kill David. Michal saves David by artifice. David joins Samuel in the company of prophets. 1 Samuel 20. David and Jonathan make a covenant of friendship and peace. David and Jonathan take leave of each other. David needed to know Saul's disposition toward him before he could safely remain at court, as Saul had ordered. A sacrifice and a feast at every new moon afforded Jonathan a perfect opportunity to inquire into the matter. Jonathan's brotherly love for David remained firm, even in the face of his father's wrath.